Previously, Vikala's close heavy attack was 11 frame startup. Pretty slow for a close heavy, since I think they usually average around 9 frames, with some being 8 and some being 10. This generally limited its utility in combos as well as frame traps. So let's take a look at some combos that couldn't work before for Vikala in the corner with close heavy. You couldn't link it off of launching them with your EX cannons. And if you wanted to link it after a Raging Strike, you had to get pretty much a full triple strike sequence, which greatly increased your combo limit and reduced the overall damage you could get with Vikala. As you can see here previously, this drop. Now close heavy is 1 frame faster, coming out at frame 10. This is pretty great since it improves it as a frame trap tool as well as gives it better combo utility. You still can't link it after you launch the opponent from a grounded Raging Strike. Nor can you link it from your EX cannon setup. However, if we looked at that previous confirm, you're now able to link it after launching the opponent in an airborne position from Raging Strike after only 1 normal, greatly improving Vikala's possible punish damage. There's going to be a little more to mess with here in terms of utility, but she generally appreciates having a faster close heavy attack. Far heavy has a similar buff as well as additional buffs to its recovery and its proximity guard. Previously, it was 11 frame startup as well, which for a normal this size is probably pretty acceptable, but nothing exceptional. Additionally, you might see that on block we were -10, meaning Vikala had to commit to an option. And on whiff, we were -37. With these stats in mind, pretty much the only thing going for far standing heavy was its range. It didn't have great synergy with its cannon setup either. The light version was just out of range before, but we'll get to that change later. In addition to that, the proximity guard was pretty weak. The opponent could usually consistently walk back and escape, so you weren't able to go for multiple far heavy attacks. All of these old properties basically made this move subpar as far as a far heavy goes, and for a zoner, you want to have some decent normals in case you can't get your game plan going and you need to box out the opponent. Let's look at the new and improved version of far heavy. It's a frame faster, coming out of frame 10. This is a pretty nice buff, but you're also going to notice that we have 2 less recovery frames to work with now, going down from -10 on block to -8. This means that we're -35 on whiff, and these extra couple frames can be the difference between Vikala eating a punish or being able to reposition herself or get out another normal and box out the opponent in some pretty good spacing traps. In addition to those changes, there's also more synergy with her cannon setup tool, which we'll explore later, and of course there's also an increase in the range of proximity guard as well. Let's take a look at that now. I'll take this moment to admit that I'm actually recording this in post as opposed to recording it live. I originally intended to record my audio voiceover live. However, my microphone wasn't actually set up to OBS, so I had to come back through and redub over this footage. So there might be some desyncs here and there. But as you can see, we can now catch Gran with 2 far heavies when he's trying to walk away after a single range of far heavy. So this is a nice change, making Vikala better at zoning. Let's move on to 2M. It has some buffs to its travel speed and distance as well as recovery. It was fairly stubby before, with 32 total frames to complete the move, and it was -10 on block. If you were to do this from full screen, it would take 5 of these attacks to reach the opponent. Let's take a look at that example. Not exactly a great normal in general, but this was still one of her best normals in her kit, and I think that's saying something about the character. Now let's take a look at the buff travel distance and speed for Vikala. While it doesn't reach the opponent from round start position, it is noticeable. The recovery has also been decreased. From a full screen position, it only takes 4 to reach them now, and I think we can greatly appreciate the increased travel speed and distance from this example here. In addition to that, with the reduced recovery frames going down by 4, the move is now -6 on block. This can be the difference between you eating a medium punish or a light punish, and if you space this out correctly, you might not even be punished at all for it. Again, pretty nice changes for Vikala here. Previously, Vikala's 2 heavy used to extend her hurt box, allowing the opponent to whiff punish this attack. This is pretty bad for horizontal ground play, and was a prevailing theme in Vikala's kit. Now, that forward hurt box has been reduced, so the opponent is less likely to whiff punish this attack. Let's go ahead and see a new example. I think this is going to be encapsulating a theme for Vikala here, where overall she's much more encouraged to go for proactive play and not get whiff punished for it. And we're going to see this across other changes as well, which we'll see down the line in the video. Jump medium and jump heavy have similar changes, so I'm going to group them together to save us some time. Previously, jump medium used to have 7 frame startup, while jump heavy had 10 frame startup. Both have been improved now in terms of this. Jumping medium is now 6 frame startup. Pretty fast, on par with some jump lights. Jumping heavy now is 8 frame startup. This should just improve the move's overall utility as air-to-airs and air-to-ground attacks. Now let's move on to Dream Come True and some of its various changes, starting with grounded version of Sike. Previously, Sike would take 16 frames to complete, so if you use it at the earliest possible time, it would take 35 total frames for Vikala to complete the move. This generally made it fairly unsafe to use, since you're taking about more than half of a second to shuffle up your item and store it for later. The opponent could potentially see this and react and reposition themselves, getting a little closer to Vikala, or take advantage of the situation in general. So, again, falling in with some of the themes that we've talked about, we're going to see the recovery reduced here in the current patch. That recovery has been reduced by 5 frames, so now the total frames only take 11 frames after you start the move. So Vikala will now be able to act and block after 30 frames instead of 35. It's a little bit of a difference here, but it should mean that Vikala is able to reposition quicker and be overall safer if she's choosing to use Sike after Dream Come True. Now let's move on to the mid-air version of Dream Come True. You could adjust the arc of the item that you toss by holding straight back, or 4U in the air. This is the alter trajectory, and this is the normal trajectory here, just to appreciate the difference. Previously, you had to go 4U, because if you try to do diagonal U, so either up back or down back U, then you did not get the adjusted projectile angle, which just made it a little finicky to input, since, sometimes you might want to have a diagonal input just to prepare for the next situation in anticipation of like an air-to-air or the opponent jumping in on you. In addition to that, Vikala would float pretty high in the air for a substantial amount of time, which was great for baiting out anti-airs from the opponent, but it lasted for so long that the opponent could wait for this, and then Vikala was pretty much a sitting duck after this. Additionally, if she had ball as an item, she wasn't able to take advantage of this. Say she threw it at the opponent just like this, well then she'd be punishable in a lot of situations, which limited the overall utility of Dream Come True Air. Of course, if you got better items, then maybe you could take advantage of this, giving yourself plus frames. But you were relying on RNG to get this kind of advantage before. Now, Dream Come True Midair is less finicky to use, since you can now use diagonal up or diagonal down input, as demonstrated here, in order to change the trajectory of your item. So this is a nice little quality of life change to Vikala players that should make it easier to get this consistent result. In addition to that, Vikala now falls faster, falling 18 frames earlier. This might seem like a nerf, but she's still able to stall her air momentum here to bait out anti-airs. In addition to that, she can now actually use this for some potential throw shimmy ideas. For example, if I have ball, which we've established was negative on block before, I can run up, jump, and throw it, and actually be plus on block and on hit. Potentially open up new pressure options for Vikala that could be pretty rewarding. Again, I see this as sort of an idea where we could potentially get some shimmies, which can work as pressure tools, or even give us combos on hit. Whether or not this is going to be match practical, I think needs to be labbed out and experimented with, but there is some potential here as opposed to it just not even being an idea to consider before. We'll see what happens as Vikala players develop around this new tech. Sike in midair has also been improved. Previously, you had 5 frames of landing recovery where you could not act, even to block. So, potentially, if you went for Dream Sike in midair and the opponent was able to put out a normal, you could be punished on landing. An example right here. Now, the recovery has been reduced to 0. So, as soon as Vikala touches the ground, she's able to block, meaning that if the opponent tries to preempt her landing and punish her, she can now block it. She can't take any other actions, though. But this should just improve the overall safety of going for options like this, and I like this change. It's similar to what we saw with Cagliostro. Various items from Dream Come True have been adjusted, so we're going to talk about all of them together in order to save a little bit of time. Previously, Ball had a pretty decently high appearance rate for itself, while Bomb and Spike Ball had lower appearance rates. You generally didn't like Ball since it didn't give you a whole lot of hits done, only had a single hit, and didn't really have great blocks done because of these properties. You much prefer some other items, like Bomb, for example, that was able to come out and leave a lingering threat that also launched the opponent on hit for some pretty decent damage. And you also like Spike Ball for its multi-hit properties that gave you a lot of frame advantage on hit and on block, as well as the fact that it rolled along the ground, creating a projectile the opponent had to respect. In addition to that, Heart and Cheese used to have different uses. Previously, Heart would only regenerate 500 HP. Meanwhile, Cheese would only regenerate 10% of your SBA gauge. This meant that you had restorative items, and if you wanted to restore a particular item, you had to believe in luck in order to pull those out. Or, the opponent would be given, like, a worse item at times. Now let's talk about how these appearances and item behaviors have changed a little bit. Ball now has its appearance odds reduce, so your worst offensive item is less likely to appear in terms of your rotation, which is nice. Meanwhile, Bomb and Spike Ball have had their appearance odds increased, so you'll be seeing more of those in your matches. How much the percentages have shifted, I do not know, unfortunately. So if there's a Vikala player that does know, please let us know in the comments below the video. Now let's move on to the more questionable or interesting change in the patch, which is to Heart and Cheese. Instead of Heart and Cheese only restoring 1 of your HP or your SBA gauge, either of these items will now restore 500 HP and 10% of your SBA gauge. So instead of these items having different purposes or different effects on the game state, they now have the same effect on the game state. And I'm not sure how I really feel about this one. In theory, this actually means that you're restoring items, your items that are going to give you more health and more SBA gauge, have now doubled in appearance because they're not really 2 separate items anymore. They're the same item, just with a different visual effect over them, which I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Like, I guess it could be a net buff for Vikala because if you're able to use it on yourself, cool, you're just getting more SBA gauge and health, but it does mean that the item icons are now redundant. Now let's move on to Dream Attraction, or the cannon setup, as I referred to it earlier. All 3 of them have had their lateral knockback reduced. So let's take a look at it now. Previously, the opponent was pushed pretty far away. This is the medium version, again with pretty far knockback. And we'll go ahead and check out the heavy version as well in just a moment. Now is also a good time to mention that there was a bug fix applied to how technical inputs would be read when using these moves, and I think this is a general bug that also occurred with other characters. And of course, you could always increase the knockback by shooting an item at the opponent. Now let's take a look at the new reduced lateral knockback on these attacks. Gran is left a little bit closer, which should mean that if you choose to follow up with a cannon strike after he recovers, he might be able to be meated by some projectiles as opposed to having an additional moment or 2 to react to them. So I think there's going to be something that Vikala players will have to mess around with in terms of their Okizeme and their follow-up options. You could argue this is a nerf because you do get less corner carry overall, but I think that this could argue to be a buff as well. In addition to that change, the light version of Dream Attraction has its location adjusted as well. It used to be pretty close to Vikala. Around Star, for example, it didn't hit the opponent. And as I pointed out earlier, this didn't really have synergy with her close heavy attack. This is just the appearance of all of them in general. Now let's take a look at the new spawn. It's a little farther away from Vikala, so it will actually reach a round start distance. This has some nice synergy with her far heavy slash, actually, since whenever the opponent blocks a far heavy slash or gets hit by it, then this light cannon will also hit them. This means that your pokes from far heavy will be guaranteed to add on additional damage for Vikala, and if the opponent blocks it, you're actually able to get a little bit of extra chip damage, set up a cannon, and potentially start some offense. Overall, this is some pretty synergetic changes for Vikala that should make her zoning game feel a lot better around her far heavy, which again has the other buffs. Now let's move on to the ultimate version of Dream Attraction, which has a bit of a mini rework. Previously, its old startup was pretty fast at 16 frame startup. However, it only had a single hit that launched the opponent and resulted in a knockdown, giving you just basically like a pop for 2,000 damage. The patch notes themselves say this is only really used in resets. I never got to see it, but I also didn't really see a lot of Vikala players. Even in the corner, you didn't get any sort of extensions using this particular attack. On block, you were able to create a lot of space with the opponent and get multiple hits, but Vikala also had a huge rebound distance, meaning that even in situations where you would like to take advantage of the frame advantage, you couldn't really do so just because of how you would basically reset to neutral whenever you use this move. On hit, both of you will be blown back to full screen. On block, both of you will be blown back to full screen. Even in the corner, because Vikala was thrown back on rebound. Now, one side effect of this is that the opponent was able to dodge this attack, then Vikala's rebound would pretty much keep her safe as she would fly far, far away from the opponent so they couldn't punish her. So there was a nice little benefit here, but ultimately, I don't think this was too great of a move to use or spend your meter on previously for Vikala. Now let's take a look at how they reworked this move. So on hit, it will now deal 10 hits instead of 1 hit. The damage is all the same, coming out to an even 2,000. The startup is slower though, coming out at frame 20 instead of frame 16, but that's not really a big deal because you can still pretty much combo into this move from any of the relative normals, like a triple strike sequence. But you're also going to see that you get a wall bounce even in mid-screen, and you're able to actually pick up combos from this. I've been able to link a far M in my examples, and Vikala players should be able to experiment and then find additional hits to tag on here. But this opens up opportunities for Vikala to use this move as an ultimate skill to extend her combo and her damage. The behavior on block is pretty much the same, except for one difference. Vikala doesn't have that huge rebound anymore. So, in cases like this, if the opponent blocks it, And if they spot dodge it, well, then Vikala is right next to them, and she's pretty punishable, but she should be able to actually take advantage of this move. It still has the crazy pushback on block, so she's not able to make this a plus frame move. It's just a greater combo tool now. Light Rodent Rhythm has a bunch of changes to it, and I think they're all for the better. Previously, this was a single hit attack that didn't launch the opponent. It was actually -4 on hit for Vikala, so even in the one situation where it seemed kind of alright, you were in a pretty bad spot at point-blank range, and you would namely just use this as a neutral poke of sorts for Vikala. It had 15 frame startup, which meant that while it could combo off of any of your close normals, like close light, close medium, close heavy, it did not, however, combo off of your far light or your too light. Let's just go ahead and see a demonstration right here after I have some unsynced footage, since I'm doing this in post. These are the close proximity normals and your ability to combo from it, and this is far light not comboing into Rodent Rhythm before, and 2L also not comboing into it before. But it basically was just a neutral poke that didn't really have a whole lot of utility when it came to your combo game. Overall, I would argue that the old version of Light Rodent Rhythm was pretty useless. I mean, yeah, you could use it as a neutral poke, but you didn't gain an advantage from it, and it had no combo utility. Taking a look at the new version of the move, we can see that it now hits twice, which I think increases the damage slightly. And it also launches the opponent, meaning that Vikala can now use this in her hit confirms to launch the opponent, get a Dream Attraction set up, and start running her game plan. And if she hits this in neutral, then she just gets more advantage. It's a pretty nice buff. The startup has also been reduced, going down from frame 15 to frame 14. So while it worked pretty much everywhere that we talked about previously, and here's an example of you getting like some Okizeme and potentially setting up a Dream Attraction cannon in front of the opponent's face, you can now also use this to confirm your far light and 2L pokes as well, again leading to some potential new offensive options and Okizeme. Nothing too crazy, mind you, since, it's not like the opponent is getting a hard knockdown or anything like that, but you still have opportunities to get your offense going, and it improves this utility as a poke, it improves it as a combo tool, and just generally rounds out the move more. Now, the damage still remains the same. It does 900, the first hit doing 600 damage, the second hit doing 300 damage. But here is the confirms from far light and too light, and the combos you can now get. It doesn't work from all ranges of far light, do keep that in mind, but I do think that Light Rodent Rhythm actually has a bit of utility now in Vikala's kit, not only as a poke, but as a combo tool. Medium Rodent has a couple of buffs to its anti-air capabilities. Previously, it could be used as an anti-air as well as a bit of an aerial poke tool. But if you did use it as an anti-air, which could be attractive since it had great range, a lot of range in fact, especially compared to her 2 heavy, you didn't really get a whole lot of opportunities to get rewards off of it. Previously, it had only 18 frames of hit stun, and it had pretty decent launch height on the third and final hit as well. So if you did catch an opponent jumping, well, they'd be blasted off into the air, and you could get some Okizeme and setups going for that one, but just not a lot of extra rewards. So even though the opponent could get checked on their jumps from far away, the reward was so low they weren't really dissuaded from going for it. Plus, there was a behavior on counter hit, where if your first hit was a counter hit, you didn't get the extra hits done because the other hits overrided it, making it kind of non-functional as a counter hit anti-air. Now, on mid-air hit stun, the third hit has increased hit stun, going from 18 frames to 24 frames, meaning that the opponent is going to have more opportunities to be comboed. In addition to that, the launch height on the third hit has been reduced. So see how they fall to the ground now? In fact, Gran recovers on the ground, giving you a lot more frame advantage to set up your offense, get close to the opponent, and make this more rewarding as an anti-air. At some particular heights, it is a little finicky, but with some practice and recognition, you'll be able to find that you can actually get a link off of this. There, for example, I was able to link far medium, so you can get used to this and tack on some extra damage and make this more rewarding for yourself. In addition to that, on counter hit, the additional hit stun of counter hit now applies to all 3 attacks. So whenever you get a counter hit, you get even more advantage regardless of what hit strikes the opponent first, just overall improving this move as an anti-air in terms of its functionality. Honestly, it's a pretty great set of changes and further improves its niche function as an alternative anti-air option to Vikala's 2H. And combined with the Light Rodent Rhythm changes, overall I think this particular special move is just way better. Now let's take a look at a universal change to all versions of Ring the Dormouse. Previously, if you were in the startup of these fireballs from frame 1 to 4, you actually extended your hurt box outwards. So check out this example here. Gran is going to go for a close heavy here, and as you can see, against a neutral Vikala, it whiffs. In the startup of my attack, though, I extend my hurt box and actually get beat out. This pretty much discouraged her from being proactive because she could get hit in startup. Now, that expanded hurt box is retracted, so instead of her getting beat out cleanly in this situation by this far heavy, instead, Vikala is able to whiff punish it. promoting more aggressive play around these Dormouse fireballs, which I like a lot, and it should feel better for Vikala players overall. Now let's get into changes to the medium version of Ring the Dormouse. This fireball used to reach at full screen, as you can see here, and it was pretty plus, and it had pretty decent travel time to it as well, but it did take at least more than 33 frames to reach. It was also +2 on block, but it had quite a bit of pushback. The idea of it, if the opponent blocked this, you could recreate more space to zone off of this move. Keep in mind that this fireball only hit against standing opponents, excuse me. So all these things considered, it was a pretty fast fireball, but it did have pretty decent recovery, since it took about 50 frames for the move to complete, so Vikala could be exposed and you could lose some ground when using this fireball, or get punished in case the opponent somehow managed to high jump over it. Now, moving on to how they've changed this move, the fireball will no longer reach from full screen, because they reduced the active frames, but there are some things to sort of make up for it. At close range, it should behave about the same, but it's much faster now as it accelerates over time during its active frame. So against a full screen opponent, while it doesn't reach, once you get past full screen by a few steps, it is a much faster fireball that should be able to check the opponent more often. In addition to that, there is less pushback on block. So the opponent does block this, they're not going to be pushed back as much as they were before. Theoretically speaking, this also means that against a standing opponent who could be standing during your block string for whatever reason, you could actually take advantage of the plus frames to renew your pressure. But again, if they're crouching, you do not have connection with the fireball. The recovery frames have been reduced by 3, so instead of being -50, you are -47. So this should mean that Vikala is able to reposition faster, she'll be a little safer, throwing this fireball out. And just as a demonstration, because of that reduced pushback, Gran hardly moves as opposed to being pushed back greatly. So, it's a fairly stationary position. Meanwhile, your light fireball is going to push back the opponent just a little bit more. So this might overall nerf her zoning a little bit, but it is also faster, so the opponent has less time to react to it, so they might get caught in their dash more often with that standing hurtbox rather, on them. And if you're able to make them stand, you're actually able to take advantage of the +2 frames with some close normal pressure. But again, they have to be standing. If they're crouching and you do this, well, you are going to die. But at least there might be a potential new niche case, so long as you're able to somehow condition the opponent into blocking this move while standing. Whether or not this is a net buff or a net nerf for Vikala, I think we'll have to stress test to see in the future. But I think that the faster fireball speed is going to generally be appreciated more than anything else. As for Ultimate Marching Teeth, the last change on our list, there's a couple of changes to the projectile speed and active frames. It was fairly slow before, taking roughly about 40 frames to reach the opponent, it would seem here. And because of that, there was not too many active frames in the move as well. It used to just have 8 active frames when it came out, but now you can see that, it was fairly slow even from full screen. In addition to that, if Vikala was hit at any point during the fireball, even into the later active frames, then she would completely lose the projectile. So this kind of felt bad to try and use in neutral to control space with a lingering fireball, and dissuaded Vikala players, I think, from using this outside of just using it at close quarters to try and reset their offense or to get a knockdown of some sorts. But I don't really think there were too many applications for this move outside of some combo or pressure fodder strings. And just to double check as well, even with the change in active frames, we're going to see that the behavior on block between the old version of the game and the new version of the game are going to remain consistent with each other. I think the active frames are just there to account for changes to projectile speed. But, this is just, to demonstrate the advantage on block in the previous patch. Now let's take a look at how fast the projectile moves thanks to the buffs to it in this patch. Well, seeing that at point blank range, we're still +29 here off of this move, so nothing has changed at all regarding this behavior, despite the changes to the projectile speed and the active frames. Now, if we go back to full screen, though, we can see that this is a much faster fireball that should feel a little better for Vikala to use as a neutral tool overall. In addition to that, if Vikala takes damage from the 23rd frame onwards, or the 13th frame if you include the slowdown effect, the fireball will persist. So if Vikala is caught up in the startup of the frames, much like Low Wayne, that we saw that change to him and his ultimate Tommy and Sammy fireball in this patch, well, then the fireball would disappear. But if you catch her too late, then that fireball will still be lingering, and this gives it a pretty unique niche in her toolkit now. Again, this is a demonstration. It's not like the old Tommy and Sammy where it's always going to come out. If it is able to get out, though, then there is a lingering threat for the opponent to have to consider and deal with, and I think this is a pretty nice change for Vikala, kind of bring her up to par with some other ultimate techniques and making this more attractive to use in neutral. Let me start off by saying I'm sorry if my audio isn't really queued up with the footage here. Again, I was recording this live and then my microphone wasn't picked up in OBS, so I had to go back and dub over all this footage, and I didn't want to spend much more time editing it as I've fallen behind on my project now. But either way, I do like a lot of these changes for Vikala. So many moves that didn't really have a niche or use in her toolkit just feel better overall. Like the Rodent Rhythm light version, now giving a knockdown, I think feels pretty great as she now has a knockdown tool to use besides using her Dream Attraction. Dream Attraction and Far Heavy have a lot more synergy. Her heavy normals in general should feel way better to use thanks to the buff to their startup. Crouching Medium as well should feel better. Just Vikala just feels like an overall better character, kind of catching up in terms of her normals compared to some other cast members, as well as just being overall safer to play thanks to the buffs to Dream Come True Sike, as well as potential new tech that is in there thanks to the mid-air version of Dream Air Sike. Hopefully she sees more of her better items coming out overall thanks to the appearance adjustments to Ball, Bomb, and Spike Ball. Still don't know how to feel about Heart and Cheese. The fact that they're basically the same item kind of just throws me off, but I guess it just doubles up how much health Vikala could regenerate, as well as Skybound Gauge, so maybe that's a net gain for her, but I do not like the fact that they're basically redundant items. Unless there's something with their behavior on hit or on block that I am missing, please let me know in the comments below about that. But I think that with these changes, Vikala should just feel more like a complete character. She has new ways to spend her meter, both in terms of neutral and in terms of combo game. Instead of having moves that sort of overlap with their purpose, now they're a bit more clearly defined. I think that she'll feel better to play overall in this patch. Not a top tier character or anything, but maybe a playable character.